10 hyperinflation stories in world history. Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. If you're new here, welcome, and consider subscribing to my channel and click that little bell notification below. There are various currencies, and their value can change due to many reasons. Although usual cases of price rises and falls can be controlled, with the wrong economic circumstances, things can easily get out of hand. Such uncontrollable, quick, and huge rise in prices is known as hyperinflation. Now let me tell you some of the hyperinflation stories in history. Number 10. Venezuela 2013. The squandering and overprinting of the country's currency by the government caused Venezuela's financial troubles to begin in 2013. According to Reuters, food and drink prices had the biggest increase in 2014, when inflation reached around 69%. According to a research study from the University of Texas at Austin that was released in 2020, prices doubled almost every 2 weeks. The Central Bank of Venezuela, Banco Central de Venezuela, announced in March 2021 that it would issue new $20, $50, and $100 bills to suit the necessities of the national economy, although the country is still struggling with inflation. Number 9. Zimbabwe 2008. According to the Cato Institute, Zimbabwe's currency crisis reached a high in November 2008, with a monthly inflation rate of almost 79 billion%. The research uses comparisons of purchasing power parity to identify Zimbabwe's worst inflation rates, even though the government of Zimbabwe stopped disclosing official inflation numbers during the worst months of the nation's hyperinflation. Days after printing a $100 million bill, with prices nearly tripling every 24 hours, the Reserve Bank printed a $200 million bill with a $500,000 withdrawal limit. Price spikes followed the introduction of the $100 million bill, and a loaf of bread went from costing $2 million to $35 million overnight. The government even once deemed inflation illegal and detained business CEOs for boosting prices of their goods at that point. Number 8. Armenia 1993. One of the nations whose economy suffered after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 was Armenia. Unfortunately, Armenia's problems did not end here. According to the BBC, a devastating 6.8 earthquake in 1988 resulted in the deaths of 60,000 Armenians and the eviction of thousands more. The Metsamor nuclear power plant, also known as the Armenian nuclear power plant, was shut down after the earthquake by government officials, which resulted in severe energy and supply shortages in the early to mid-1990s. According to the Cato Institute, prices doubled almost every 13 days as a result of these variables, with a monthly inflation rate of 438% in November 1993. Number 7. Yugoslavia 1992. The new Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, formerly known as Serbia and Montenegro, experienced monthly inflation of 50% after the collapse of Yugoslavia in early 1992 and the commencement of fighting in Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Inter-regional trade was destroyed during the early split of Yugoslavia, which resulted in hyperinflation and decreased production across numerous industries. The Federal Republic was subject to an international trade embargo by the UN between May 1992 and April 1993. As a result of falling tax receipts and reduced output, the government's fiscal deficit widened, rising from 3% of GDP in 1990 to 28% in 1993. The government used the printing press to print a lot more money to make up for this imbalance. The printer was operating at full capacity by December 1993, printing 900,000 banknotes per month that were practically worthless by the time they reached people's pockets. Number 6. Argentina 1989. Argentina's hyperinflation was brought on by war debts. According to Reuters, only 30,000 of the country's 30 million citizens were paying income taxes in 1989, after the nation lost the Falklands War in 1982. As Cato Institute stated, by July 1989, monthly inflation rates had reached 197%. This led to rioting and resource looting up until Carlos Menem gained control of the nation. Argentina's inflation rates eventually started to decline dramatically in the 1990s, after spending the decade cutting import charges and attracting foreign investment. Number 5. Greece 1944. Technically, Greece's hyperinflation started in October 1943, when the Germans occupied the nation during World War II. Prices doubled in Greece every 4.3 days. Prices increased by 13,800% in October and by another 1,600% in November. Greeks held drachmas on average for 40 days before spending them in 1938, but by November 10, 1944, that number dropped to 4 hours. The greatest currency denomination was 50,000 drachmas in 1942. But by 1944, it had increased to a note worth 100 trillion drachmas. Although the public continued to use British military pounds as the de facto currency until mid-1945, the government issued a redenomination of the currency on November 11th that changed old drachma to a new rate at 50 billion to 1. Number 4. Hungary, 1945. World War II had a devastating economic impact on Hungary. According to estimates, 40% of Hungary's capital assets were destroyed in the battle, but they put helping Germany first and engaged in a frantic, debt-fueled ramp-up in production. As Germany never paid for this, Hungary had to pay the Soviet Union significant reparations when it signed a peace deal with the Allies in 1945. These payments made up 25 to 50% of Hungary's budget during its hyperinflationary era. The Allied Control Commission, meanwhile, virtually co-opted the nation's monetary policy. They kept printing money to pay the bills until the daily inflation rate rose to 207%, and prices doubled every 15 hours. Number 3. Germany, 1923. Germany was obligated to pay back significant war debts to the winning side after losing World War I. But as their paper mark currency's value had already significantly decreased, Weimar Germany was compelled to sell significant amounts of marks to convert them into foreign currencies that could be used to pay its debts. To raise money, the German government started selling marks at any price, which ultimately caused hyperinflation. Because of this insane hyperinflation, Adolf Hitler gained power. Germans were worn out from post-war reparations and all too willing to hear Hitler's message, with prices doubling every 3.7 days and inflation at 29,500%. Number 2. France, 1795. Starting in 1795, the French people went through a period of hyperinflation as a result of the French Revolution. According to the Foundation for Economic Education, during this difficult financial period, which lasted from 1793 to 1795, the National Assembly, the revolution's ruling body, created an excessive amount of assignats, the country's currency at the time, to pay off debts. By November 1795, there were 19.7 billion assignats in use, and since the currency's initial printing, its value had fallen by 99%. According to the Cato Institute, inflation became so extreme that it peaked in August 1796 at 304%. Number 1. China, 1278 to 1368. Some people do not consider this to be a case of hyperinflation. But let me tell you that China was among the first nations in the world to begin using paper money. It was a success, but inflation exploded as soon as the government loosened restrictions on its supply. During the time of the Yuan dynasty, they used paper money to finance military battles, leading to hyperinflation. Due to excessive spending, the dynasty began to deteriorate in the middle of the 14th century as a result of the government's inability to control the crisis, and the people's reluctance to support it, as the currency depreciated and people became unable to pay for basic needs. So that's all for today's video. If you made it this far, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon for more awesome content. Thanks for watching.